Alright, so we're in another Springfield, Rolls-Royce Springfield Phantom 1, but this time this one has Regent Coachwork, which is a much sportier, perhaps more interesting looking body style. And Regents are fairly desirable, so they made perhaps 20 or 22 Regent Coachwork cars. Most of them were rebodies, meaning that a more formal bodied car would be traded in. It would have very low mileage, still be in very good condition. They would take that body off and then they would build a rebody, which is what most Regents were. That was the same with York Roadsters and some of the Playboys. Generous, was he? So this one is a bit unusual in that this car was always a Regent. It never had any other Coachwork. And there are a few of them, maybe a couple, that were always Regents, never having any other first body. An interesting thing about those sort of chopped and channeled, and the body sat down further over the chassis, whereas this Regent sits on top of the chassis. And it gave those Regents sort of a leaner, lower, more modern look. And the reason for that was at that point in time they were competing with the Phantom 2. And Springfield didn't have the funding to gear up to produce the left-hand drive Phantom 2. So England made those, and they made 125 left-hand drive Phantom 2s, and then they shipped them over, and a lot of those got Brewster or American Coachwork. Is a very nice running, driving car, steers beautifully, handles very nicely, has very good brakes. cosmetically very nice as well. It shifts a bit differently than the other one, so it may take me a little while to get used to how this one shifts. This car's been outfitted for touring, so it has an overdrive for a little better highway speed miles, so you can go a little faster. It also has a rear view mirror camera, which is a nice feature for an old car, especially when you have to back it in and out of a garage or something of that nature. It also has turn signals, and it has ports for charging cell phones and GPSs and that sort of thing. So I hear people talk a lot about downshifting. Well, I'm in third gear, and you know, we can still chug along up this hill perfectly fine. And then when we come to a stop sign, we'll just go into first once we come to a complete stop. Moving along from a rolling stop in second gear is also not a bad idea. Going to demonstrate the overdrive, but I just remembered that we accidentally bumped a wire off of it and I forgot to reconnect it. So I'm going to have to do that perhaps on another run. Silver Ghosts and Phantom ones had a torque tube, which means that there's a big steel tube that connects the back of the transmission to the rear axle, and the drive shaft is inside that. And so basically that's what holds the rear axle in the car. the toolbox door all the way. Check this out. Double check. It's closed. Everything's in good order. It just is probably something rattling inside the toolbox. It's always good to check them. Losing a toolbox cover would not be a good thing. It's always good to sort of time out your gear changes to whatever's going on the road with traffic and lights and stop signs. It's good to keep that in mind as well with braking. Even though we have very good braking in these cars, you still want to think ahead. Just for you, I put the top up, put this window up so we don't have all the wind noise. But it's a nice day out and it'd be great to be driving along with the top down. But sometimes you have to make sacrifices. Another nice thing about this car is that it has a lined top, which makes it a little bit cozier in the cooler weather. And also cuts back a lot on the wind noise. The downfall of it is it doesn't really allow the top to come down nice and neat, so it can stick up a little bit. This is not one of my favorite bridges to get it through, but types of roads that are really nice with these cars. Not a whole lot of traffic beating down on you, and you can be a little bit more leisurely driving along, enjoying the scenery. poofs here and there, and the car hasn't really been out on the road much for the last few months, and I'm just going through the tuning and getting it smoothed out and all. Unfortunately, after these cars sit for even just a few months, things go downhill very quickly, and the jets in the carburetor get gummy, and the spark plugs get gummy, and you got to take care of all those, and then it gets running fairly well, but then you still got to clear things out, and in the exhaust there may be some varnish or something, you know, still residue in the carburetor a little bit. There may be a little bit of oily residue or something around the valves and the valve seats. But as you run it, then things start to clear out and start feeling better. Without an overdrive, this car still cruises along very nicely. Constantly correcting and keeping it straight on the road, whereas the radials just track very nicely. They have a little bit of a whine to them, which some people may find annoying, but I think the trade-off is for the handling and all is much greater than a little bit of noise. my next driving videos will be a different model. I'm getting very close to being able to use a Phantom 3, and that's going to be a really interesting video because Phantom 3s are so nice on the road. They're so smooth, quiet, powerful. Big difference from Phantom 1 to Phantom 3. So hopefully we'll be getting to that point in maybe the next few months. So stay tuned.
To the overdrive.
come to a hill like the one we're about to approach, it'll just purr right along up. Do a little brake demonstration here, so hang on. So those people who say that mechanical brakes are no good and they're not safe and etc., well, those are mechanical brakes and they can stop on a dime. Now of course that's only in the case of Rolls-Royce and Bentley, because they have the mechanical servo that's on the side of the transmission, and it uses the output shaft of the transmission to rotate a clutch type configuration, and when you engage the brakes, it engages that clutch, which pulls your brakes on, and the servo primarily operates the front brakes. So a neat side effect of that is that you have sort of an anti-locking braking system, because when your rear wheel brakes lock up, then that releases the servo a bit, and then your front wheels still spin, so you can still steer. But again, it still provides you with really quite amazing braking, particularly for a car of this vintage. And Rolls-Royce stayed with mechanical braking for quite a while, probably because their mechanical brakes were better than what was coming out with other cars that had hydraulic brakes. So we're going to do a walk around of this late Springfield Phantom 1 Rolls-Royce with a Regent Coachwork, just to give people an idea of what they're like. So the engine is, of course, an inline 6-cylinder, and you'll notice that this one looks a bit different from the other Phantom 1 that I did the video on, and that's because this is a later engine and it has an aluminum cylinder head. They didn't change just the material of the cylinder head, they also changed the design, and the aluminum cylinder head provided a little bit better compression ratio, and also they were able to put the spark plugs on one side and the other side, which gave a little bit better flame throw across the top of the piston. This is a mock-up of the original oil filter, just to give people an idea of what it looked like originally. We have a slightly more advanced Beezer tank, and this is the Rolls-Royce produced generator or dynamo, and it is a third brush dynamo. It has no voltage regulator. The box on the top is a cutout, and the cutout merely acts as a one-way valve, so that when the generator has produced enough electrical current to charge the battery, the contacts in it close and send that electrical charge to the battery to replenish it. And you need to have that, because if the engine is off, you don't want the field windings to be energized, because then they'll heat up and eventually burn out. So you want to be able to release the energy that's inside the field coils to prevent them from burning out. We have dual ignition like on the Ironhead Phantom 1, except the distributors are now Dijon distributors instead of Bosch. And other features that you'll see on a later Phantom 1 are the conical shaped headlights. They then went to fender mounted lights instead of the cow lights. And you have thermostatically controlled radiator shutters. And you won't see the device that controls the radiator shutters unless you take the shell of the radiator off. On these later ones, you can actually remove the shell. And then in this area, you will see where the control device is. So next I will raise the bonnet on the other side and show you what things look like over there. So before we go to the other side of the engine, I did want to point out that below the radiator you have these, we'll call them dummy shutters. And the reason they did that was at this point when they were making these later Springfield Phantom 1s in Springfield, the Phantom 2 came out. And the Phantom 2 is a much more advanced car than a Phantom 1. And they do have a little bit more power and drive a little bit nicer. But Springfield could not tool up to produce the Phantom 2. And the Phantom 2 had a taller radiator. So what Springfield did was they had the dummy shutters down there to make it look like a taller radiator. And then they referred to their later Springfield Phantom 1s as 4065 horsepower cars. Basically saying that they had equal to more horsepower than the Phantom 2, and that it was still a very current and good choice compared to the Phantom 2. So again, this is the other side of the aluminum head Springfield Phantom 1 engine. Carburetor is basically still the same. We do have different manifolding. So instead of having circular port gaskets, we now have flange type connections. So the manifolds have changed. You'll notice the ignition wire flute has come out to this side so that it can get to the wires to the other side spark plugs. The autovac is very much the same. And another Springfield innovation is that it has an air filter on the carburetor, and which was not something that happened until much later in Britain. And again, we still have this oiling port, which is very convenient. And I have rearranged the fuel line on this car to prevent vapor lock, as I did with the other one. And so redirecting the fuel line like this helps to prevent vapor lock, and I find that that does work very well. Again, these cars do not do well in parades or in very heavy traffic on a very hot day. So avoid those situations. So a lot of these Springfield cars were blessed with American Coachwork. This one is a Brewster body, and it has a lot of very neat features. It's a very sporty car. But the American bodies, particularly Brewster, were incredibly sturdy. They used a lot of really good wood because we had a lot of good oak and ash over here, whereas in Great Britain they were getting a little low on wood from shipbuilding and and all sorts of other things. And you can just see that, you know, they used a lot of heavy, thick wood construction, and you can just feel it just by shutting the door. And you have a lot of neat features like these really neat door locks. I haven't seen this type of a door lock on any other car. That's not to say that there aren't any out there, but it's the first one I've seen. And this, of course, has, Americans refer to them as a rumble seat. In Great Britain, it's referred to as a dicky seat. And it has another neat feature. This door has a solenoid, and you push a button on the dash, and the solenoid releases and allows the door to open automatically. And I suppose that was a feature so that you can lock up the car, but you don't need a handle or a lock on this small door. You have the button on the inside to basically keep it secure. And it's just a neat thing, you know. You would pull up somewhere and pop that button, and then everything opens up. Most later Springfield Phantom ones used Trillin taillights to match the conical shaped headlights. Trillins were also widely used, well, not too widely used, but sometimes used on Lincolns and other American makes of cars. And they went to a different style bumper. This bumper was carried over to the Phantom 2, so it made it difficult to recognize at a glance a Phantom 1 from a Phantom 2 because the bumper and a few other subtle things. So we added another Trillin light on this side to improve lights with turn signals and braking, and it's just a safety feature. And these cars carry the Buffalo style type wheel. Again, this is a radial tire that I find performs very well. And this has the different type of wheel nut from the British cars. And that's the one feature that I prefer the British cars with over the Springfield ones. I think the Dunlop wire wheel and wheel anchoring hardware is probably a little nicer quality wise than the Buffalo Springfield ones. So one thing you want to check, particularly with Springfield Buffalo wire wheels, is sometimes that edge there can, not this one, but that one can crack. That was a hard bent edge. Maybe they didn't anneal the metal properly. It really should have been more of a rounded bend that would have prevented cracks. But you know, again, we also have to look at wheels are starting to crack, or not starting to, but you know, it's 80, 70, 80, 90 years later that we're starting to find more. There were also a very limited set of stainless steel wheels made for Springfield Phantom 1s, and I think that there were probably like 36 wheels made in total, and they're really a super good wheel. They're very difficult to find, and if you do find them, they're not going to be cheap if the person knows what they are. You can tell what they are compared to chrome wheels. The stainless steel ones are non-magnetic, so you put a magnet on. If it doesn't stick, then they're stainless steel. If it does, then they're steel, because even a steel chromed wheel can sort of look like the stainless steel wheels. And you'll see a lot of the the British will criticize a car when they see a polished stainless steel wheel and they think somebody had the wheel chromed, and it's incorrect, because they don't realize that there were these limited sets of stainless steel wheels for Springfield cars, and those mostly ended up on York Roadsters Regents and Playboys and the sportier cars, and they really set the car apart, and they have a lot of flash. So, and again, this is an original Regent body on this chassis, meaning that it's not a rebody, which a lot of the Regents were. So we still have the toolbox on the side here and the battery box. Whereas on the later ones that were tended to be the rebodied ones, they moved the battery box underneath the car and they did away with the toolbox. And the reason for that was because they channeled out the body and put it so that it went down further onto the chassis, whereas this body sits on top of the chassis. The other ones sit down, and that gave it a leaner, lower look and more competitive look with the Phantom 2. So, and it's interesting that Springfield was actually competing with the Phantom 2 with their late Springfield Phantom 1s, and they were just doing what they could to keep the business going. So, and you have all the original features that were typically there with the throttle and the timing and all that. These are areas that I'm noticing are still unfinished, but at some point in time maybe we'll do that. And we have yet another master switch configuration on Springfield Phantom 1s. I think there's probably like 3 or 4 different varieties of master switches. And then we have our normal complement of instruments. I added in the fuel gauge, or actually the owner added in the fuel gauge. The owner did most of the work on this car himself. And the later Springfield Phantom 1s had the Seth electric clock, and we still had the Stewart Warner type speedometer. And then we haven't added in a switchboard for the overdrive and turn signals. So again, this car was outfitted for touring, so you'll see things to make it a little bit easier for when you're out on a long trip, so you can keep your cell phones charged and things of that nature. And this is what the lined top looks like, which again makes it a little cozier in the wintertime, in the cooler months, and cancels out a lot of road noise and wind noise. So we'll take a peek on the underside of things here on this Springfield Phantom 1. What you're looking at now is the overdrive unit I had mentioned about to give you a higher ratio highway speed. You know, now with this overdrive, this car cruises comfortably at 60, 65 and can continue to do that for quite a while. And again, it's attached to this torque tube, which basically holds the whole rear axle in the car. And you can also see the large size of the braking shoes. You're looking at the brake backing plates now, so you know you have a rather large diameter drum and shoes, a very large muffler, which makes it extra quiet. The 3-speed gearbox, and then of course the underside of the engine. You may see little drips of oil here and there, and again, that is what we refer to as controlled seepage. They didn't have any modern types of oil seals like they do now. So basically they avoided seals, and they made anything that had an output shaft or input shaft to be higher than the oil reservoir, and then they used what would be called an Archimedean screw seal, which is basically like a thread, and it had a very close tolerance orifice around it, and has that Archimedean screw rotated. It created a little bit of a suction from air, and it caused whatever fluid it was holding back to stay in the reservoir. But of course you'd get a little bit of weepage past that when the car was standing still. This will especially happen when the car is just been serviced and all fluids are topped up and all. And it's pretty common on shutting down with these cars, you're going to get a couple of drips of gasoline like that on the floor. And that's just the residue of gas that's in the intake manifolding, and it's basically collecting and then seeping down into the carburetor and then out the drain, the overflow tube. So a couple of drips is very common. Anything more than that is an issue. Hydraulic shocks, which are very effective. And again, the Buffalo style wheel. I had the underside of this car CO2 cleaned, dry ice cleaned, so it's a little bit cleaner than what you would normally see. We also have another unique feature are these leather gaiters, and they're just basically covers over the leaf springs to prevent them from being exposed to corrosion and becoming rusty. So the leather holds in whatever lubricant you have in there, which really should be a molybdenum disulfide grease if you have them all apart and all. And this has, which normally referred to as cantilever leaf springs on the rear. So unlike elliptic springs that you would see on Phantom 2s and other models, Silver Ghosts and Phantom 1s, which have the torque tube, have these. I sometimes hear people refer to them as grasshopper springs. If you want to see more videos like this, then be sure to subscribe to my channel and give me a like, give me some compliments, let me know what you think of these cars. And hopefully you'll become an enthusiast if you're not. They're really a good product, and if you want to get into the old car hobby, yeah, it can be expensive, but these can be very enjoyable to own, restore, and to drive. Thank you for watching.